Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the bridge. Today we're doing season 5, episode 8, and we have a guest, Laurie Arnold, with us. And Laurie's been with us before. Welcome back, Laurie. We're
Thanks
glad
for
that
having
you
me.
came on for our grief and loss series, and it's been a very, very successful series. And so we're so glad that you joined us. We will start with Sandy's quote, and then I'm going to kind of give you the floor to get started on your journey.
Okay, our quote for today is life is very short. So break your silly ego, forgive quickly, believe slowly, love truly, laugh loudly, and never avoid anything that makes you smile. Valerie Gill.
Okay, thank you. I like that. That's a nice one. Well, Laurie, welcome. And I'm going to just kind of give you the floor, so to speak, or the camera, or whatever you want to call it, and talk to us about grief and loss, your grief and loss.
Sure. I am now 64 years old, and so I have been through some grief and loss experiences in my life, more than one. And they've all been different in many ways and yet similar in many ways. And I feel like each one has kind of prepared me a little bit better for the next one. Um, And I went through, as far as the stages of grief, I definitely, in each one of my grief and loss experiences, I have spent different amounts of time in the stages. And mainly based on the circumstances of the loss, not necessarily on my prior experience with it. It's not like I feel like I go through the stages faster because I have more experience. It's not like that. It's just really about the circumstances. And I thought maybe I would talk about two of my grief and loss experiences that had some pretty stark differences to them,
Sure.
just by way of contrast. My first real significant one was the death of my paternal aunt, Norma. For anybody in my family or friend network who might ever listen to this story, you will have recognized this name because I have spoken about her a lot and her impact on my life. She was kind of what you would say is a second mother to me, in very real and practical terms, not just because of how close we were, but she actually spent a significant amount of my life raising me. And she was quote unquote disabled. She was paraplegic, had been so since she was 16 years old. Wasn't expected to survive her injury, but she did. She actually lived to be almost as old as I am right now. I think she was early 60s, maybe 61 when she passed away. And I remember just in my life, especially maybe into my teens and early adulthood, it kind of started where I found myself kind of rehearsing in my mind how I was going to cope with her leaving because of her importance in my life. And it would just devastate me in my imagination, and I would almost quickly go, oh, stop thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you thinking about it? Why are you imagining that? My gosh, stop it. She had quite a few health problems due to her paraplegia, but she never came across or lived in such a way that made her seem as though she had health problems. Like, she was very, very active and very, very present in everything that she did. Her home was kind of one of those hubs where a lot of people hung out. She was politically active and active in her community as an advocate. I mean, she had an enormous impact and influence on me and my life and my outlook and what I'm into. And you might remember some of the things that I talked about in the podcast of yours that I was on before. I mean, she was a huge influence on all of my perspective and activities. Well, when she got real sick to the point where, because she had never really been sickly, she had just had issues related to her paraplegia, but she ended up with hepatitis and liver failure due to blood transfusions that were, given to her when she was initially injured, as well as over the years when she had to have surgeries and things like that. Before there were screenings for things like that, and so yeah, she ended up with liver failure, and so we knew that she was going to pass away. And when we knew that, it was probably days or weeks at the most away. And it happened that a good friend of mine and my mother and I were kind of the vigil keepers in her room. There was a time when a lot of people came and we had kind of a sort of a party celebration in her room. But for the most part, it was just us, and as well as my infant son, my youngest. He was only 3 or 4 months old. And luckily they let him be in the hospital room with her. This was in 1993, just for context there. And it was just fascinating going through this process. Once she took that last breath, my mother and I almost let out a yelp of joy in a way, because what led up to it was, we were just holding her hand and petting her and telling her it was okay, and we were going to be okay, and please don't hang on for our sake, and if you need to go, you need to go. And there were a couple of times when she stopped breathing, and then she would take another breath, and we would kind of laugh and joke with her and say, yeah, not until you're good and damn ready, right, Norma? And that was kind of a play on a joke that had been told over the years about not until I'm good and damn ready. And she had been in a coma, just unresponsive for a while and not looking at anyone or responding to anything. And then at a certain point, the nurse came in because she said there was a change in the blood pressure, big blood pressure drop, and that meant that death was really imminent. And so we leaned in close, we held each other and her, and all of a sudden she just turned her head slightly and her eyes locked with mine. And I felt like, and this is where my emotions are going to come up, get the Kleenex ready. I felt like she was speaking to me through her eyes.
Yeah, right.
And speaking directly to my heart. I can't even describe it. It was so profound and what do I want to say? Strengthening. It was like she was giving me strength.
Yeah, right.
Through her eye contact with me. And it was almost like there was something tangible being exchanged. And I'm not even one of those kind of ooey wooey people, that relates to that kind of thing. So it was pretty profound for me. And my mom said she witnessed it too, like from her perspective on the other side of the bed. She saw that happening, and it was very profound for her too. She and my mom were very, very close. They were more like sisters than sisters-in-law, which is what they were. And when she took that last breath, it was like, yeah, you did that thing. And you did it on your terms when you were ready. And it was the initial feeling was one of like jubilation. I just can't even really say another word for it. It wasn't devastation in the first
kind
moment.
of relief to have her not be.
Yeah, well, leading up to it, it wasn't like that. Like when they told us, my mom had decided she was going to go take a rest in the little quiet room thing that they set aside for people who are doing this kind of thing. So she had gone down there, and then the nurse comes in and says, I can see her doing a lot of things with the stuff. And I'm like, is something happening? And she says, the blood pressure has taken a real drop. That means, we're really close. And so I had to go right back and get my mom up. She had just laid down. And we're walking down the hall back to the room, and both of us are just saying, not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Why did I think I was going to be ready for this? I'm not ready. So it felt like that leading up to it. But in the moments after she took that last breath, we had this rush of jubilation. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was relief so much, because the analogy that came to me right away as my mom and I were processing this, it was like it was a birth. And that we were like witnessing a birth, or midwifing the birth, or assisting with the birth, because the way that the timing of it, right? First, like if you've had kids yourself, you know what I'm talking about. You have the early labor, you're starting to have the contractions, but you're still able to move around and talk and do things. And then you get into the intense part where you're just breathing and breathing. And that's when we were leaning really close in. And when she locked eyes with me, it's like, that's when the real labor was starting. And then when she took that last breath, it was like she pushed that baby out. It was like she birthed herself into wherever we go. And that's why it felt so, I wasn't thinking that at the time, but immediately after, when we were talking about it, I said, it was so much like a birth. And I'm not very good with analogies either. Like, usually I don't relate things to things like that. I'm very literal.
Right.
And so I say all that to say, as far as the stages, I don't think I really spent much time at all in denial. If I did, it was the days and moments leading up to the death. And I don't remember hanging out in anger at all. Before she went and lapsed into the coma, she made out a will. She talked to us about what she wanted. And so we were kind of working through things, and we didn't have any stuff we had to get over with each other, so I don't feel like I spent any time there. The bargaining and negotiation definitely happened in the reality of, she's not going to survive this, right? When the doctors are telling us this is it, we can't do anything except make her as comfortable as possible. Well, what about a liver transplant? Like, isn't there something we definitely did that. And honestly, because of the whole way that I felt like she did that thing with the locking of eyes, I didn't spend time in depression either. I was sad, and I had lots of moments of crying. Just whenever I would think about, I certainly would tear up and I would cry, and I would be sad that she was gone. I would miss her and terribly, terribly miss her. But I never fell into a depression thing. And I feel like the acceptance came fairly quickly, even though even in acceptance, I still would be sad. Like, I remember some months later, I was going through something in the bathroom of her house, which I inherited from her. And she left that to me in her will. That was the only closest thing to an heir that she had. And I found something like, I forget what it was. It might have been some of her ileostomy equipment or some kind of thing like that was, clearly hers. And I just sat there and holding it and just bawling.
Yeah, right.
And, and that kind of thing would happen occasionally and it still happens over the years. Like, I could have started bawling when I was going through my description, but I controlled myself. But I could have had a good cry, because my emotions are pretty to the surface today anyway, because of another grief and loss situation that is potentially happening here with my kitty cat. And so that was like my first real significant experience with grief and loss of someone very, very close to me. And before I talk about the other one, to give you the kind of contrast, I'll see if you have any questions or want me to touch on anything more deeply.
One of the things, Laurie, I would say is that acceptance doesn't mean that we don't still feel the emotion and the pain from that. I think acceptance is saying this is a reality thing, but you still carry missing that person and grieving that person. And I think that acceptance is different than just still feeling sad that they're not there.
Yeah. Well, I think too, with a long illness like that, you do a lot of the stages of grief before they die. You've processed, and then with her, it was so much. She was released from this earthly body, and she transferred her direct legacy to you. I think that's so profound. That's not an experience everybody gets, and what a gift.
Yes.
And so the jubilance I can see, because she all of a sudden she's not held back by her body anymore.
Right.
And yeah, that's powerful. But it's very true with long illnesses that people experience grief before the person dies, and it's not going to diminish it, but it changes the after effect.
Well, and that she had to, as a young person, you said she was 16 or whatever when she became a paraplegic.
Mm-hmm.
That she was going through all this grieving process too, as a teenager, trying to make a life for herself and be strong. And it sounds like she was a pretty amazing human, that she didn't let it stop her. She went forward in her life and made the very best. But she had to have gone through a lot of this same stuff here.
Yeah, and she definitely talked about that. She talked a lot about her experience in the aftermath of her injury. She fell out of a very tall tree.
Oh, wow.
In the property of the home that she left to me.
Oh,
her brothers and her were climbing trees, and I think they were trying to watch fireworks or something they were trying to watch something off the distance, and they were up in a big cottonwood tree. The branch broke, and there she went, tumbling down, hitting lots of other branches on the way down. She had a lot of other injuries too, and she wasn't supposed to survive, especially back in, whatever,
right,
1945 or so when it was.
So she was a miracle, and but it sounded like her profundity and her essence was just something that you experienced with her. And it's wonderful that you spent so much time with her, because you have stories.
Oh my gosh,
that you can
so many stories.
Yeah, that you can
hilarious stories.
Yeah, and that's powerful to be able to have those stories and then share them, not only with the world but with your kids, and pass the legacy on. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it took her a long time to get to the point where she was very accepting, herself. She was in the hospital for 4 years, if you can believe that, being in the hospital for 4 years. She became addicted to morphine and, all kinds. She had to get off of morphine. And when she finally kicked all of that and decided to get her life together, she decided she was going to live independently, which was also very unusual for a disabled woman, and she did that for the rest of her life. I think she moved out of her home around her family home at around 30. And then she lived independently for the rest of her life. And she was an advocate for other disabled folks and housing for disabled, inclusive and equitable housing. She lived in public housing, and, she worked to make sure those units weren't segregated off, or the disabled area or whatever, that they were integrated in. And she used to say that her paraplegia, that, her disability had kept her out of nothing except trees. And it's kind of true. Like, she drove, she swam, she flew in a helicopter. She didn't drive the helicopter, but she rode in a helicopter. Like, she did all kinds of things. She traveled internationally, and stuff like that. So yeah, she was a real inspiration and to many people, not just me.
Yeah, boy, what a biography that's going to make someday, huh?
Right.
So Laurie, as you think about all this, in your hand, what are maybe 3 or more characteristics that she gifted you with because you knew her and experienced her?
Humor. She was freaking hilarious and didn't take herself or anybody else too seriously. And she had a real contagious giggle as well. And just her whole face and body was involved in her laughter, so
Awesome.
she was just fun to be around in that way. I would also say, I guess, determination, and she was very justice minded. Like, I said, she was active in her community, not just around disability rights, but, civil rights. I think I mentioned in the other podcast, I was raised around people that were very involved in civil rights and anti-war and, labor rights and things like that. And she was right there.
Mm-hmm.
She was real involved in native indigenous fishing rights here in the Puget Sound area. And so she certainly instilled that, in me as well. And then, so that's like 2 things. What I say, humor, determination. Another thing that she gifted me with that I'll mention is she made sure that even though we were poor and working class, right? She made sure that I was exposed to things outside of that, right? Like she tried to, give me experiences and what I want to say, we had deep conversations, even when I was just a young child.
Wow.
We would have these deep conversations about, like, what about the universe? Is the universe really ever expanding and goes on forever and ever? Or does it end somewhere? Well, we can't wrap our minds around going, how can something go on forever and ever and never stop? That's incomprehensible. But then on the other hand, what if it stops somewhere? What's at the end of that? A wall, a fence? Like, what's on the other side of that? Like, so we would have conversations like that. And so that was something that she gifted me with too. She wanted to make sure, for example, that I didn't only listen to top 40 radio. She would play Beethoven for me and tell these great stories to go along with the music and make it real dramatic. And this is the kind of stuff that she did. And not just with me. She did that with a lot of the neighborhood kids, other kids in the family, and other extended family kids. So yeah, those are some off the top of my head, I could say.
That's awesome. Do you have her giggle?
Do I have her what?
Giggle? Her giggle.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't think so exactly. I think I have somewhere between my mom's and her giggle, because my mom was more of a guffawer,
Well,
she was more of a ha ha ha, and
my
aunt was more of a he, and I think I'm somewhere between.
Well, she just sounds like an amazing woman. That's just such a great experience that she gave you, and lots of stories, and you get to be the keeper of her legacy through that. That what she gave you, that is just powerful.
Yes, definitely.
All righty. So, do you want to move on, or you have anything else you want to tell us about her?
I think I can talk about the other one. I'm probably going to tear up on the other one too, because it was different.
Oh, well, by the way, are you human?
Right.
Right.
So in between that one and the one I'm going to talk about now, in between Norma's death and the one I'm going to talk about next, my mom died. And I'm just skipping over that one just because of time, really. If we have time, maybe I'll come back to it.
Okay.
but I wanted to talk about the other one because it had so many different features to it. And that was the death of my best friend and fellow teacher, who died at 49.
Oh, young.
So I am way outliving her, right? She died at 49. She was almost 12 years older than me, virtually the exact same age as my husband. They were born a week apart. So she was my best friend. Her name was Michelle Boucret. And we taught together, began our professional careers together, pulled each other along and to get farther together. She got her master's, then she said, you got to get your master's. We went back and forth like that. And when she got sick, I stayed in denial all through her illness, all the way to the end. I was deep in denial. Denied how sick she was, just everything. I was just deep in denial. And so when she actually died, I was literally shocked and poleaxed. I was shaken to my core. Like, what? No, how? What? And I was there. I watched it all. I was there with her through all of it. And yet I was in deep denial. I just didn't want to accept at all that she was that sick. And she had kind of a rare thing. I don't know if y'all remember or ever knew about, I think it's a Good Morning America, Robertson, I think is her name.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
She had the same thing that my friend had, but she was able to get a bone marrow transplant because she was able to have a match. And that's what it's called myodysplasia syndrome. And it's a platelet cancer. It's a blood platelet cancer.
Yeah, my dad died from that.
Oh my gosh. And I was even in denial that, I'm sorry to hear that. I was even in denial that it was a kind of cancer. I was like, oh, it's a blood disorder, like I was just like, wow, and she was, it's something that you can in theory live with symptoms management, which generally includes regular blood transfusions, and some kinds of chemo drugs. The problem is that most people who get it don't get it until they're older anyway, and oftentimes they end up dying from something else. The disease itself is kind of managed, but then they die of something else because they're already elderly. This is not the same with someone who's younger that gets it, because it wears you down. And then also the drugs that they treat you with it have a potential side effect risk of giving you another kind of cancer, which is exactly what happened to her. She got leukemia.
So did my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. So once she got leukemia, it was pretty tough. And she was on hardcore chemo for the leukemia for, I think it was 5 weeks. Just as sick as a dog in the hospital. She was in the hospital the entire time. This was not anything she could go home and, come back for. She was in the hospital. And then she got real sick, and I think she got a lung infection, and she just couldn't come back from it. The doctor was like, well, we're going to put her in ICU, and we'll try to get her past this. And people can get past this and come back and get, back into the groove. But she couldn't, and they looked at her white cell count again while she was in the ICU, and it had just exploded again. She wasn't really responding to that 5 weeks of chemo. So then it became a decision for her son, who was then only like 20, 21 years old.
Wow.
Her only child, to make the decision about letting her go, which he did. And we had a beautiful little family time with her in her last hours. We dressed her in one of her beautiful, well, didn't dress her in it, but laid it on her, one of her beautiful belly dancer ethnic dance costume. She was a dancer. She did a lot of dances from the Middle East and Central Asia and Eastern Europe, and, you know, put rose oil on her and played music. And but I was a mess for a long time.
Yeah.
Years,
Yeah.
honestly. I was a mess for years after this, because first of all, I think it's somewhat different when one of your peers dies, and it feels like it's too soon and too young, and they had much more life to live, and why, and it's unfair.
Right.
And also because I was in such denial that I was, when you get into the anger thing, I was angry at myself.
Yeah.
I was not angry at her.
No.
Although I'll say I probably had some anger towards her during the illness, because I was like, how can you do this to me? It's just weird how you have these thoughts. Like, but I'm just being honest. I had those thoughts, like, how could you do this to me? And I even, in my mind at least, accused her of being overly dramatic. Like, you're not really that sick. You're just being, you're being the usual dramatic Michelle.
Yeah.
Queen.
And so that anger was really directed, where the real hardcore anger was really directed at myself after she died, because I was like, how could I be such a fool? And how could I be so insensitive? And how could I be so selfish?
So that was wrapped up in guilt then.
Yes. Oh, the guilt I had. And I don't even think I'm totally over. I don't know if I'll ever get over the guilt of that. It's definitely less, because it was almost consuming me for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of time in definitely 4 of these stages. Big time.
Well, and it's always toughest to forgive yourself, to let go of it. And it, like you say, it doesn't necessarily go away. You go in and out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that kind of related to that, about how it doesn't ever go away, related to that thought, one of the things that's always kind of stuck in my craw, I don't know if that's the right expression, but something that bothers me that I don't feel is people quite articulate well. And I'm not going to say I'm going to be able to articulate it, but it's this idea that the grief never ends. Like people say, when somebody dies, and especially when they're in it, and other people are empathizing, they're saying, yeah, I lost my mom last year, or I lost my mom 10 years ago. It never stops. You never stop grieving them. And I'm like, no, don't say that. That sounds so hopeless. Like, you're not going to feel so devastated forever. Like, that's what gets communicated to me when people say that. It's like, if I feel like how that's going to get received by someone who's just experiencing the loss, this way I feel now is never going to end. What are you even saying to me? And so, yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's not like you completely stop grieving for the person, but you don't grieve them every day and every moment of the day. And the feeling of the grief changes. Like, you still miss them, but it's like, for me, it's most of the time anyway, it's more of a wistful kind of missing. It's a wistful, nostalgic memories, and wishing that I could tell them about this thing that's going on, or wishing I could ask them what they're thinking, what they would think about what's going on, wanting to hear their perspective, and not having access to that anymore. And you miss that, but it's not the devastating thing anymore. And there's certainly times when I cry. I cry about my Aunt Norma. I cry about my friend Michelle. I cry about my mom. I even cry about my dad, who I wasn't close with, but I saw him through his death too.
Yeah.
But it's not the kind of devastating thing on the daily that it is in the beginning. So I just want to say that to anybody who's listening, who is either going through this right now or is going to eventually, because we all will.
Yeah.
No, it's not devastating every moment of every day forever and ever. It's just not. We wouldn't be able to survive it if it was.
Right. And I think missing them is different than deep grieving. the missing them be something wrong if you didn't miss them, or maybe, it just depends. But no, that's very good. We've got a quote at the end of this slideshow. I don't know that I'll get to it, but it's about grief being like the waves of the ocean.
Mhm.
Have a big one wave wash over you, but then they settle down and go into the shore, and it's not the same. And you're right, and it's different for everybody, and it might be different for different people.
Well, and Laurie, I have to say, listening to your story, it sounds to me like you have a real gifting in being able to be there for people until they take their last breath. It sounds like you love them well, and you are there in so many different capacities. So even when you're talking about your girlfriend and feeling the guilt that you didn't, take her seriously or whatever, you made up for it and being there with her until the end, and loving her well. So hopefully that feeling of guilt will go away eventually, because we all stumble every day. We stumble in our relationships where we maybe say something or do something we're not as cognizant of their need as we wish we were when we look
Mhm.
back at it. But you made up for it, kiddo. You were there and you loved them, and you found such a beautiful way of celebrating them out of their life here.
And that's another gift that my aunt gave me. I mean, one of the things that I knew in my core of my being, and I still know it, is that number one, I don't want anyone, whether I know them personally or not, and definitely not if there's somebody that I care about, I don't want them to die alone.
Right.
And number two, anybody who I care about, I'm going to be there
Right.
when they die.
Right.
That's a
As long as I'm allowed to be, I will be there.
Right.
That's a huge.
And I have been ever since. I've seen after my Aunt Norma, it was my mom, then it was my best friend Michelle, then it was my mother-in-law. No, it was my grandmother, my mother's mother. No. My mother-in-law, because I didn't get to see my grandmother. She died kind of in an overnight in her sleep thing. She wasn't in a long illness thing. My mother-in-law and my dad, and I'll be there for whoever it is. I just know that that's something that I've decided to take on. I don't even know if I've decided to take it on. I just know that I have to.
Right.
Right. Well, and that's quite a commitment. I mean, it is. And it's, you are and I don't know if you're going to agree with this statement, but I think that you are a person of a high empathy.
Right.
It may not appear the way other people's empathy appears, but that gift is something, you're there for them, you're listening to them, and you feel it. You know what I mean? It's very present in you, and that's a gift that you are giving to the people around you and the people that you love, and that's very powerful.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but I want to say, just for transparency's sake, that I also feel like the decision, if you want to call it that, or the commitment, or just the feeling that I have that I will be there for anyone who I care about who is dying, it's almost as much for me as it is for them. Because I really feel like that's one of the gifts that my Aunt Norma gave me, was to realize how important it is for the healing process to actually participate in it, because it's, in the end, it's not as scary and horrifying as people have in their imagination, of what it's like. And the idea that it was so much like a birth, and the idea that, well, we're transitioning, like we're birthing ourselves into whatever that next plane of existence is. It feels like it's helpful
Yeah.
in the grieving process. So
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like it's as much for me, or it's a big part of it, is
Yeah.
that it's for me as much as it is for them.
Yeah.
So,
It's
Laurie, I wanted to share something with you. This is a quote that we used earlier on one of our podcasts, but it came to mind when you were talking. Bring love wherever you go. Share light wherever it's dark. Leave blessings wherever you've been. Be kind wherever you are. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, and you're almost a midwife in the process. And that's not something that everyone can do.
Right.
You know,
It's a
most,
gift.
yeah, most of us, I mean, and I'm going to include myself, I'm one of these, put blinders on me. I don't want to see it. I don't want to go, and going through the process is pretty painful for me to even open up. But your ability to open up and listen to people, either somebody who's dying or somebody who's going through a grieving process, is a pretty rare gift. And it's wonderful that you're sharing it. It's really awesome. And that you open up to what your feelings are. And that's how to heal. The only way you can heal is through the process.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You brought up the midwife thing again, and I think it was after my mother-in-law died. At some point, anyway, I decided. Oh no, I know what it was. It was when I was in retirement, and I decided I needed to do some go into therapy, because I thought this is a big transition, a life transition, and I'm always advocating therapy for other people. I should take advantage of it for
Right.
myself.
Yes.
And through that, I was talking about this experience with my aunt, and my therapist said, "Oh, that's a thing. There's a thing called death doula."
Oh, wow.
And when she put that into my head, I decided, you know what? Because I had told her I'm going to be there for anybody who I care about. I'm going to be there for them. And in those moments, and she said, "Yeah, that's called death doula or end of life doula." And I said, "Ooh!" And I started investigating, and I went and got the training for it, because I thought, okay, if I'm making this commitment, I would like to get some better skills. Like, I feel like I have gotten some things intuitively, and I've gotten some other things through experience, but like I could actually get more tools and stuff for this, and also to help not just the dying person, but the loved ones of other loved ones of the dying people. So
That's
yeah, I went and got the
That's
training.
the first time I've heard of that. That's very interesting. I didn't know there was such a thing.
Talk about
Yeah.
finding your path, or your path finding you.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful. We're going to be doing a series on transition, so we'll have you back with that story and how it all came about. But death doula, that's awesome. That's a good one.
Yeah, and I would say the other final thing, I'm assuming we're getting probably close to time here, but one thing I want to mention is about that empathy and helping to listen and be there for people who are going through grief and loss. One of the things I've definitely learned through my own grief and loss thing is how important it is to be able to just listen and give people space to talk about the person. So like when someone in my life has lost someone, one of the first things I try to do is reach out and say, I would love to take you out for like dinner or lunch or coffee or something, or just come over and hang out with you so you can tell me about the person and talk about them and share about them. Because one of the things that I know happens is it's very uncomfortable. Like people feel like they don't want to bring up the death with you, or they don't want to bring up the person because it's going to make you sad. And so they're always trying to distract you or make you cheer you up, right? Oh, I need to cheer the person up. And honestly, when we're going through it, we just want someone to listen to us unload all the feelings and the thoughts. And it's very hard to find that,
It is.
as people are trying to cheer you up all the time.
Right. We have a hard time letting people be sad.
Yeah.
Well, and just to be that person's safe person. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to, And we had the gentleman that was just on this morning talked about having a fellowship of suffering, having safe people that you can just talk to, that there's not any expectations, there's not any
Yeah.
cheering up. And that's so powerful, so powerful. So, Laurie, well, you kind of talked about this, about just listening. You have any other points of things that you might want to tell people out there?
I think it would be worth everyone's time to do a little bit of reading about, I guess, kind of a concept of a good death, or it's something that I got from the death doula training. Like, people can be, especially if they're in an illness situation or a situation of some kind where the death is imminent, but it's not instant, right? And you have some preparation for it. You can create the conditions where the death is a good death for the person who's dying and for the people who love them. And I think it would be worth everybody's time to spend a little bit of effort to just learn a little bit about that, even learn about the process physically of what happens in the hours and moments before death, so that it's not so scary.
Right.
There are people who've done the death doula thing who, there's somebody actually in the Seattle area that does this. I think it's called their entity is called A Sacred Passage, and they do death cafes and things where they just educate people about death and dying and try to demystify and make it less scary and horrifying for people, so that, like, when you experience this, you have some preparation. Kind of like, when you go to the birthing classes when you're pregnant, right? And you learn about what to expect.
Yeah.
I think that is super, super important, because it's, instead of avoiding, that's what our culture has us doing, right? We avoid it, even when we get the mail or the phone calls about, oh, you need to do end of life planning. It's not a subject we like to talk about, but everybody should plan.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that, and I understand why. Like, it's something that in our culture we've learned to avoid and to think of in strictly negative terms.
Right.
We've just learned to think of death in strictly negative terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just think it would be worth everybody's time to get a little bit more comfortable with death as a part of life.
That's really good advice. And I can see you in the future facilitating a workshop like that.
Yeah.
But you would be great, and
I would come if you ever do that, Laurie. I would do that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
yeah.
I'll definitely put that into the
Okay, good.
idea hopper.
Yeah. So you know how we finish. What's one takeaway from our conversation today? Laurie, have you got one takeaway?
Well, I like what you said, Sue, about the grief coming in waves, like, because that's really kind of what it's like. And it's almost like, at first it's a stormy wave. You think of a stormy ocean, and all the waves are really big, and they're crashing, and they're very dramatic and almost overwhelming. You feel like you might drown, or whatever. And then the storm calms and the waves are less.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have light lapping waves. You still have waves, but they're just the missing and the wistful nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of feel a little lightness of that. But every once in a while, a big wave comes again for some reason.
Yeah.
It's a good analogy.
I'm going to move to that quote. Sandy, what's a takeaway that you have?
There you go.
my takeaway is that we all have different giftings, and I love Laurie's gifting of being able to embrace somebody in their end of life. And it's a great gift, Laurie. I think it's a beautiful thing that you provide.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. I too am really grateful, and I guess my takeaway is, you might be a person on my list to be a safe person to call and have you listen, because it's really important to find that safe person. It doesn't happen, and a lot of people, don't know what to say, but
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, so here's the quote. Grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes it's overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. And so I'll put this in the bottom of your notes too. But thank you, Laurie. I want to have you back. I want to have you back for transitions and maybe some more um, death doula stories as
All
you
right.
expand your horizon. You're just such a wonderful person. I didn't even know your Aunt Norma, and she sounds wonderful, and she passed a great legacy on to you.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much. So I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
I'm gonna stop the recording, but I want you to hang on just for a second, okay?
Okay.